Hey, what's going on, guys? So first off, the biggest thing people were probably noticing is that EA had already removed paid progression options from Road to Glory and Online Dynasty. And this update is basically the follow-up to that. They wanted to explain the direction they are taking with progression, and it is pretty clear they want these modes to feel slower, more deliberate, and a little more rewarding when you actually earn upgrades instead of rushing through everything. That is really the theme running through the whole post, and it applies to both Dynasty and Road to Glory in different ways. The Dynasty side of this update is probably where the biggest change lands. EA is replacing the old Coach XP sliders with 3 new speed settings, and that is a pretty major shift if you spend a lot of time building a program. Career is now the default and it runs at 1.0x XP, so that is the slower, more authentic route if you want the full long haul feel. Simulation bumps that up to 1.25x XP, and casual goes to 1.5x XP for players who want coach growth to move faster. What is important here is that the old fastest option is gone, and EA is very open about why. They do not want coaches hitting the ceiling too early and making Dynasty lose the tension that is supposed to come from building a program over many seasons. And that change applies in a pretty broad way. It is not just for new saves either. EA says these settings will affect existing dynasties, and they work in both online and offline modes. If you are in an online dynasty, the commissioner is the one who controls the setting for everybody in the league, which makes sense because otherwise a league could get messy fast if everyone could set their own pace. EA also says these settings affect CPU coaches too, so this is not just something that changes the user experience while the rest of the world stays the same. This is about the entire ecosystem of the mode. What I think is especially important is the reasoning behind it. EA keeps coming back to the idea that Dynasty Blueprint is supposed to make rebuilding harder and make long-term success feel earned. They are not trying to have every coach max out quickly, and they are not trying to turn every program into a super team in just a few seasons. In their view, coach points, archetypes, staff choices, recruiting, school resources, and all the decisions around how you build your staff are supposed to matter. So even if some people wanted the faster pace back, they are clearly choosing balance and long-term structure over speed. That is the trade-off here. Recruiting also got some attention, and this part feels like one of those updates that may not look dramatic right away, but should matter a lot the longer you play. EA tuned recruiting, so CPU-controlled teams compete better for highly rated recruits, and they also improved the way CPU teams prioritize recruits and keep them after making offers. On top of that, they adjusted late cycle recruiting, so fewer recruits end up floating around without real scholarship options. If you've ever gotten deep into a dynasty and watched recruiting feel weird in the late stages, this kind of tuning is exactly the sort of thing that can make the season-to-season loop feel smoother. They also touched off-season progression, and this is where things could really snowball in long dynasties. EA says player progression across the board is going up, and they specifically note that deeper into a dynasty, you should see more players reaching 90 overall or higher. That tells me they want rosters to keep evolving instead of flattening out too quickly. At the same time, this kind of change can make future seasons feel more volatile, because if more players are climbing into elite territory, then roster management and recruiting keep getting more important. It is one of those changes where the short-term and long-term effects are probably not going to feel the same, which is why EA also mentions that some of the full impact will show up more clearly in future seasons or new dynasties. There are also a few future fixes EA called out for Dynasty, and these are the kinds of details people notice way more than they expect. One of them is a bug where recruits targeted by Hawaii could instantly get an F grade for proximity to home. That is the kind of thing that sounds minor until you actually run into it during a recruiting battle and realize it could change the whole outcome. They also fixed an issue where the risk of transfer bar could display incorrectly after a valid NIL offer if the player's NIL valuation was way above expectation. On top of that, recruiting budget tuning is planned for a future update, along with more recruiting generation and player progression work later on. So this is not the final word on Dynasty tuning by any stretch. Road to Glory is another area where EA is being very firm about the direction they want. Standalone XP sliders are not coming back, and they are making that pretty clear. Instead, progression is tied into the full structure of the mode, which means difficulty, weekly decisions, fitness, NIL deals, wear and tear, legacy score, scholarship bonuses, and how you play on the field all matter together. I know some people will hear that and immediately wish they could just move one slider and call it a day, but EA is clearly trying to make the mode work like a complete system instead of a simple stat grind. The idea is that your player growth should reflect how you manage the whole career, not just how much XP you want to pump in. A lot of the Road to Glory logic in the notes is really about rewarding challenge. EA says higher difficulty gives you better progression opportunities, and they even mentioned that playing on freshman versus Heisman is supposed to matter in a real way when you are racking up stats. They also explain that scholarship bonuses now give you additional offseason progression each year, which helps spread growth across a career instead of dumping it all at the start. Another thing they point out is that skipping high school means skipping that first year progression modifier. So the path you choose at the beginning has actual consequences. That is very much in line with the rest of their design philosophy here, which is basically that your choices should shape your player in a meaningful way. There is also an important note about starting overall ratings. EA says players may begin Road to Glory at a lower overall than they did in the previous game, and that is intentional. They want the pace of growth to feel different now, with the long term ceiling still being there if you earn it. Legacy score also continues to matter because it sets the long term ceiling for your player. So even if you start lower, your end result can still be strong if you build things properly. That is a big part of what makes this update feel like a philosophy update as much as a patch note update. The Road to Glory bug fix itself is nice to see too. EA says edge players could fail to trigger the position battles they needed in order to move up the depth chart. And that was addressed in this title update. They do say an additional fix is planned for the next update, so it sounds like this was not the full solution yet, but it is still good that they got at least part of it cleaned up now. They are also tracking a separate cap breaker issue in Road to Glory, which means there is still more work to do on that mode. If you have been playing a linebacker or edge rusher and felt like progression was not behaving the way it should, this is one of the main fixes you were waiting for. Gameplay got a smaller but still useful pass. EA says this update includes stability fixes, which is the kind of thing nobody gets excited about until the game starts acting weird and then everybody cares a lot. They also fixed an issue where coach adjustments set in game settings were not carrying into Dynasty mode. That is one of those bugs that can quietly mess with your entire setup because you think you have adjusted things a certain way, but the mode is not actually respecting it. That kind of fix matters a lot more than it might sound like at first. And then EA also gave a heads up about what is coming next on the gameplay side. They say a future update is going to fix defensive packages resetting to default when an opponent immediately goes hurry up or no huddle. And that sounds like the kind of issue that can absolutely wreck a defensive drive if it keeps happening. They're also fixing switch stick input delay, which should help with faster player switching when you are trying to react on defense. Both of those are the sort of things that can swing a game in a really frustrating way, so it is good to see them already pointing to those fixes before they land. So overall, this update feels like EA drawing a pretty clear line about what College Football 27 instead is supposed to be. Dynasty is meant to be slower, tougher, and more layered. Road to Glory is meant to be shaped by the full career experience instead of a single slider. Recruiting is getting tuned so the ecosystem behaves better, and gameplay is still being cleaned up while they work through the bigger issues in the next update. It is the kind of patch that tells you a lot about the direction of the game, not just the list of fixes.